You see this a lot in single family offices or global families. They've amassed quite a lot of, we'll call it collectibles, automobiles. We like to call them non-bankable assets, paintings, jewelry, etc. And the litany of, call it key documents to have to actually validate the value of this piece or this collectible, as well as where was it exhibited, exhibition history. The nuance of owning such different kinds of assets is really key when you in your chair, advise a client. You need to see their holistic balance sheet. It is no longer as simple as 60-40 equities, fixed income.
Welcome to Planning Reimagined, a podcast from the planning experts at Robin Glenn and ARC Investment Partners for wealthy families and successful business owners. Hi, I'm Celeste Moya. Welcome to another episode of Planning Reimagined, where your wealth journey meets our expert insights. In today's episode, which is the second in our series on family offices, we're channeling our inner Albert Einstein, who once said, "I'm more interested in the future than the past because the future is where I intend to live." And that's a perfect quote for what we're going to cover today, because we are now going to go into what is the future of family offices. We know they're always evolving, but what do they have in sight for the future? And I'm super excited today because we have a wonderful guest with us, Charmaine Tang, who's not only a great friend, but a wonderful professional and just so knowledgeable in this space. Charmaine is the CEO of Orca Americas, a tech powerhouse that's headquartered out of Zurich, and they cater to global families and family offices. She's a NYU Stern School of Business alum and has a certificate from Harvard on sustainable business strategy. And you might also recognize her from her insights on Crane Currency, on her appearances in CNBC and Fox News. So thank you so much, Charmaine, for being here. We're so happy that you could join us.
Thank you, Celeste. Yeah. Great to be here.
Thank you. And of course, we're also joined by our very own Kris Stiegel, who's our resident expert in advanced planning and very well-versed in all of the nuances of family offices. So, Charmaine, you wrote just a very insightful white paper. It was for the International Family Offices Journal, and it was specifically on what we're going to talk about today, the future family office. We all want to know, right? What is it going to look like? We work with so many of them, and everyone is different. We talk about that all the time, but it's interesting to think about what's in the future, in store for the future for them. And your article touched on that. And actually, your paper started with that Albert Einstein quote I just mentioned, because it's so appropriate for our conversation. Clearly, future is going to be filled with technology. AI is kind of taking over the world by storm at an incredibly fast pace. But with that, there's all of these debates on, are the robots going to take over the world, right? So kind of a little sci-fi-ish, but let's just start with that, humans versus technology. In your paper, you stated, the future family office is not about humans versus technology. Could you elaborate on how you see humans and technology working together to enhance family offices?
Sure, Celeste. Yeah. Family offices are concerned with three major imminent issues.
Okay.
So first, let's say one is succession. Obviously, the rising gen or the next gen is right there. And what we're seeing are principals sort of reaching a point where they're looking to either transition a business, transition a family office, or just plan ahead for the future. The other part is the transitioning within a family office. So transition of staff, of key leaders, people who've been with the family office a long time. So really a trusted internal team. And that can be a CFO, a COO, a general counsel, all the way to CPAs, et cetera, internally. And then the last thing that, is important to think about is what we call key person risk. And so key person risk is the person who kind of has, as we say, if this key person gets hit by a bus, what do we do? I have a client as an example, a family office who, I'm sure many of these family offices that you all meet as well, they'll do a simulation of what if scenarios. So, what if someone gets hit by a bus? That key person can be the principal. It can be the COO, the CFO, the long-standing assistant in a family office. but whoever that person is, they house some very valuable institutional knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And the ability to codify that and record that for future generations or future teams, et cetera, is really valuable. So this is where technology steps in. So to answer your question, humans versus technology, we like to view it as humans and technology. Humans are still very, very critical. You had alluded to it, every family office is quite different. And we like to say, every family office is looking for a customized solution for their family office, sort of like a bespoke suit, right? Mm-hmm. No family office is the same. But that being said, humans are not, made irrelevant or obsolete due to technology. Family offices will continue to have a constellation of humans at the core, obviously from the family members to inside the trusted team, but also outside advisors. You're seeing a lot of outsourcing of advisors, consulting. There's all of these humans that really, to have a constellation of these humans that understand the family, that's of great value. But what on the other side, when I say humans and technology, the other side of it on the technology side, again, as you mentioned, there's a plethora of technologies coming at us, boom, 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 boom. And there's a lot to ingest and understand. So on the technology side, family offices are reevaluating their current technology stack, what solutions they've been using, because that goes in hand with the succession, the transitions, and sort of the change that's happening in the family office. Technology is a tool, really. It really gives the family office an opportunity to dig deep and think about really operationalizing and professionalizing their family office.
It's so important. It's so interesting that you mentioned risk management on the first episode in this series that Kris and I are on with a different gentleman. We talked about how one of the biggest risks is that these people that are part of the family office are a crucial component to it. And sometimes families take that for granted. The fact that you said there's families out there that do these simulations, that's phenomenal, because in our world, Kris, I don't know that we see that very often. I feel like they're just hoping, praying that they're eternal, right? Their staff is eternal.
Yeah, no, it's interesting that you bring up, you brought up key person risk and also, transition. One of the things that I found amusing, or not amusing, but a lot of times whenever we're working with family offices, you got this one individual person who has, all that institutional knowledge about the family and the inner workings and the relationships that work between the two. And that same person is also running the spreadsheet that's running all of the businesses for the
on
company.
Excel.
And so I feel like, this is such an awesome conversation because, I feel like with family offices and that's about to be transferred from the next, from, the current gen to G2, G3, and so on. And with where it's sitting, I think we're at a really interesting inflection point where folks are going to have to deal with those two pieces of knowledge. Like, how do you take the institutional knowledge about a family and how do you also protect the fact that there's some spreadsheet running their business and sort of integrate that into new technologies and new formats that really allow families and family offices to move forward without giant hiccups in how they actually do things.
And also like Gen 1 or whatever that older generation is probably does things differently, especially from a technology perspective, right?
Totally.
Than the newer, younger generations. In the previous episode, we also talked about a family office that we worked with where there's one single accountant who maintains everything for the family on an Excel spreadsheet. He's getting older. It's password protected. What's going to happen, right? And it's almost like they're just ignoring that as a problem. But it is starting to happen more and more. And as these generations, get older, kind of transition out, as you mentioned, that is a very big risk among their family offices. So with that, knowing that that's such a big part of the risk and also knowing that every family office is different, they want these customized solutions. because one, they just like to be treated special, right? So, but two, they need it because everybody's business is different. One company, I mean, one family office is in real estate, another one is in, oil and gas or different things, and they invest in all these alternative assets. So what are some specific areas that you see within the family office that technology can really help them, now that we're in this transition phase?
Okay, awesome. I'll start with Chris's question. This is very rich thoughts. I co-authored an article with Rich Wolkowitz in Crane Currency. And Rich Wolkowitz is actually an expert in family dynamics, family governance, transition planning, succession. And one of the toughest conversations to have is for the next gen, rising gen, to speak with principals, the G1, et cetera, about transition. It's quite sensitive. And what we've noticed, which is really great to sit on this side of the table, coming from the technology angle for family offices, we're starting to see the next gen who has a greater comfort level and propensity to use technology, bringing technology into the conversation of the family office with their parents or with sort of the senior advisors within the family office, and using that as just sort of the ground, the ground floor of a conversation around transition and succession. That's of really great value when you talk about institutional knowledge and information transfer. That's one of the greatest risks to a family office. So in a family office, while you may think you have the perfect people in place or you get the team set up for transition, those people are only as good as the information they receive, right?
Yep.
And
Absolutely.
at the core of the information, the way to really manage that information and really mitigate risks around lack of information, flow of information, communication of the information, this is where technology steps in. On the tech side, the way we think about family office technology, we'd like to describe it as 3 legs of the technology stool, right? And so sort of one leg being reporting systems, right? So things where it's a CIO tool, it's securities performance, it's, private investments, et cetera, often tools like an Adapar or Black Diamond. On this side, we have what we call sort of accounting, general ledger, GL tools, right? That can be in a family office anything as basic as an Excel spreadsheet to QuickBooks to really super sophisticated things like Sage Intacct, right? That's an example. At the top of this stack is what we would call administrative or organization software. That's actually where we sit.
Okay.
Where Orca sits is sort of at the top, where the collection and coordination and communication of that information is key. And the intricate relationships between humans, individuals, trusts, operating businesses, all of these things that are so critical in terms of succession planning and wealth planning, past, present, and future, can be captured by our technology.
So, Charmaine, that kind of leads me to an interesting topic of the story of Orca. Like, why was Orca started? Like, what was the need there, or what was it that really generated the need for this software that, as you mentioned, kind of sits at the top of everything else?
Great question, Celeste. So Orca was born 7 years ago out of Zurich, Switzerland. The key problem with family offices is oftentimes the collection of information, which I alluded to earlier. We were founded and funded by 10 single-family offices globally, 8 of which were in Asia, EMEA, Europe, and the other 2 were American families. So these families basically wanted to solve the problem of having sovereignty over their data and their information. What often happens in a family office is chasing documents and corralling information. So the true inspiration is in our founding families. Among our founding families, these families are global families, and they might own conglomerate businesses, which are across multiple jurisdictions. You might have 5, 6, 7 siblings. Some of them have households with upwards of 20, 30, 40 in the G3, G4, G5. And so what Orca was looking to solve was to have a high-level visualization of what you own. Again, while that seems rudimentary, the tracking of ownership is getting increasingly more complicated. You start layering complex asset classes, private investments, special purpose vehicles, SPVs, etc. We're not just in liquid assets. You then layer in trusts across jurisdictions. You layer in family operating businesses, outside investments, and you start to really have quite a web of ownership. So Orca started at a place of, what do we own? What does that look like visually? And then what does this mean to me as a member of the family? So what Orca does is it's a visualization picture. It looks like a PowerPoint structure chart. However, as people like to call it, it's PowerPoint structure charts on steroids. It moves dynamically, and the son or daughter can see their perspective of what they own, not just as a piece of the family, but themselves as an individual.
And that's so important. I mean, I think Kris and I have seen this over and over where somebody inherits an insane amount of wealth, and with that comes things they didn't even know existed, right? And that, I'm sure, Kris, that we have plenty of examples of families or individuals where now, Gen 1, Gen 2 is deceased and they don't even know what to do with these things, right?
Yeah.
So I think that is a very important need, because if they now, when that person is still alive, can share, here is what you're going to inherit, here's what you're going to inherit, and you don't have to see what your brother is going to inherit, but here's what you're going to have. And I can explain to you why and how this works during their lifetime.
A story comes to mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of our single family office clients lovingly calls this scenario Project Red File, is what it's jokingly called. But as I mentioned to you, sometimes it's, grimly called, the death scenario or something like that. But what families find, and to your point, what am I going to inherit? How do I validate that? Do I have the documents? Do I have the final trust documents? And having a centralized place for that in a plan when that happens is hugely valuable to the family. Our founding families, that was actually what sparked Orca, was chasing documents all over the world, in some cases physically couriering them from country to country within Europe. It racked up a lot of legal bills, just fees that, had the families and single family offices had this information centralized in a safe place, it would have saved time, money, and improved efficiency significantly for the families.
Absolutely.
Yeah, totally. I had a situation a few years back where second gen was about to inherit stuff, and they weren't really sure how anything was owned or structured, and they literally mailed me a giant box of documents that I had to kind of go through and try to figure out what in the world had actually happened. And it's not just the documents, right? And it's how it's titled, and all of these things like really matter. Whether it was retitled, like all those things really matter. And so if you can have that kind of centralized depository of information, one, right, to your point, it makes it so much easier for people to understand what in the world is out there and what in the world they have. But even from like my perspective, Celeste's perspective, when we're trying to help a family with their planning, like having that broader picture about what's going on with the family and the family office, a lot of times helps us understand better and best in class planning strategies to deploy for those families as well. We can work in a vacuum, of course, but if we can do something at a broader scale that makes a much wider impact across the board by having that kind of information and ease of access to get to it, it's huge. It becomes wildly impactful for families.
Yeah, having that information helps the advisors really, really hone in on better advice, right? And more customized, effective advice. I think the other thing that's, the professionalization, right? And sort of operationalization, another key part that Orca, I think is the heart of it, is the documents, right? Being able to find the document, the final document, and when, in Project Red File, as I give an example, to be able to just literally go to that place and validate, yes, I inherited a painting. Is it real? Is it, where is the appraisal? Is there a certificate of authenticity? You see this a lot in single family offices or global families. They've amassed quite a lot of, we'll call it collectibles, automobiles. We like to call them nonbankable assets, paintings, jewelry, etc. And the litany of, call it key documents to have to actually validate the value of this piece or this collectible, as well as where was it exhibited, exhibition history, the nuance of owning Such different kinds of assets is really key when you know, in your chair, advise a client. You need to see their holistic balance sheet. It is no longer as simple as 60-40 equities, fixed income. It is not only global, but like I said, the true picture of, you know, 5 homes, 15 cars, et cetera, et cetera. I want to give an example, Kris. You said this came to my mind. So what happens oftentimes, families will have an enterprise or business and the focus is the business. The children may or may not work in it. And that runs, you know, that's the main focus. And what happens is there's sort of this aha moment where another article, Rich Wolkowitz writes about in Crane Currency. I love this sort of theory. It's called the embedded family office. And what you're seeing from a risk standpoint and governance standpoint is that the core business, call it a real estate company or even, you know, industrial company, the teams within the operating business might be handling some of sort of the personal elements. And that is a governance issue, a risk issue. And I think families are taking a really hard look at that because of sort of the exposure involved. So that being said, Kris, to your point, that's why it's really important. Again, you'd be amazed when it's like when doctors are the worst patients.
Yeah, of course.
It's, you know, these gifted families and principals, but then there's boxes in the attic. There's paper, there's files. Oh, it's in my head. I have a family here in Texas. I really love this family. And what's fascinating is finally they've gotten to the point where they have 3 children. One is active in the business. One's going to form the family office. And the third one doesn't want anything to do with it. And they've sat dad down. Dad's in his 80s. And for the first time ever, sat down with a piece of paper and he drew their ownership. They had never seen that. They had never been at a point where they were comfortable as a family to talk about that. So I think family dynamics, totally normal.
And something we haven't even touched on that would be a whole other topic of conversation, but important to point out is there's also shared ownership and shared risk, right? And so how many times are maybe that there's siblings that own properties together. One of them didn't pay the bill. There's a foreclosure that affects everybody, right?
Yeah.
And so it's important for them to not only understand what do I own, but what do we own? Because long term, that's going to impact them as well. And we've seen that with families where it's created a lot of discord.
Yeah.
When that does happen.
I think this is one of my favorite topics. And we have a family. They're actually a testimonial video on our website. And the family's called the Billingsley family, based here in Dallas, Texas. Their business is real estate, ranging from commercial, multifamily, lot and land, etc. And to your point about ownership, their ownership structure is quite complex. They have 800 plus entities.
Wow.
Within each entity is a property. And within each entity, each family member can participate in different ways. You can be an LP, a GP, you can, you know, be a majority, et cetera. And what you start to see, to your point, Celeste, is layers and layers. And so their tax team internally, the VP of tax, uses our tool because they have, in some cases, a 15-layer look-through of ownership and calculating not just direct ownership, but effective ownership of a property in a trust, owning a GP here and an LP there, and this family member here, and the sort of intricate web of that. Keeping that in, 800 different spreadsheets was quite a task for the team.
Yeah, I get nervous just thinking about it.
Yeah, it's like gives me hives.
Do that. Yeah.
But and that was the problem we were looking to solve. And that's the reality. A lot of family offices have it in Excel, and that's fine until a point where that VP of tax is going to retire and there's still 800 spreadsheets and it's just not efficient. They shared with us, the Billingsley family or the Billingsley company shared that using Orca, the tool actually helped them with tax filings that might have taken 6 weeks, right, to get that information together and get it ready inside a week, because now they're using it as sort of the center point of it. I also wanted to point out ownership is really, really critical in the States now.
Yeah.
So at Orca, one of Orca's key areas is compliance. Again, inspired predominantly actually in Europe, where it's a very compliance-heavy system. I dive even one level deeper. In Germany, they have something called the SRO, and essentially German companies, people, entities have to report their beneficial ownership. And beneficial ownership is, in the States, that's, 25% ownership or more. And that's legislation. And Orca was actually purpose-built for that because the tracking of that was really, really important, right, in Europe. Fast forward, a piece of legislation we all know and love called the Corporate Transparency Act. The Corporate Transparency Act, which many of you know, FinCEN is sort of the body that's requiring in the States anyone with a legal entity in the States, whether it be an LLC, private, et cetera, must report beneficial ownership. And that has created a compliance. It's just opened a Pandora's box of complexity and compliance needs. And while this is still sort of back and forth, the reality is it's really important to know what you owe. Because if you don't report, you're looking at fines of $500 a day. There are time requirements, X number of days to report. There are ongoing requirements. So Celeste, your point about understanding what you own, not just directly, but also through effective ownership, is a compliance requirement in the future.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah. I mean, we talked about risk in the beginning of this episode, where at some point somebody's got to kind of manage the risk, and one of those risks is legislative, right? Nobody really thinks about that necessarily. They think legislative risk, and they probably think tax. But to your point, legislative risk can also be, new burdens put on reporting requirements like the CTA. You mentioned Europe and Germany's SRO, but you also have the common reporting standards, and then you have PATCA, and all these things sort of change. So if you're working, just in the U.S., you've got a set of rules. If you're working internationally, you might be playing by a whole different set of one global rules and then also local jurisdiction rules. And by not having things centralized, then, the ability to be able to quickly adapt to changing legislation could be a nightmare.
Totally. It's, I love that point, Kris. Compliance, regulatory, it's not going away, and it's actually accelerating at a clip that's exponential. And your point, Kris, about global families, I mean, the FATCA is another great example, but essentially with compliance, what's really important is having that information, what I alluded to earlier, having your information centralized, knowing your information, and then being able, there's a requirement towards increased transparency, right? That's what it's called.
Right.
But I would say also the disclosure and reporting of that just becomes increasingly important, and compliance, like I said, is just not going away.
Yeah, and how great is it to have something like Orca where you can go back and say, this is the person that, because some of those regulations require for you to note who drafted this document, right? So here's who drafted it, here's who owns it, here's who's responsible for it, here's the person that has a slightly bit of ownership into it. And finding it, because when you need those documents, it's never the right time. It's always in a hurry. You're in a hurry. You have to get tax deadlines. Things are happening. But if you know where to find it, if you have easy access to it, I would imagine that makes everybody's life easier, both the families, their staff, everybody that's internal to the family office.
Celeste, the matrix.
Game changer.
Oh, game changer. Because again, Celeste, you've nailed it. It's actually a matrix, right? It's the information reporting requirements, but the matrix gets complicated with the people who touch it. So in the Corporate Transparency Act, you have everything from a company applicant to someone who has control, and all these questions about what is control, right? Is it, you could be maybe not owning, but you have control through leading an organization, C-suite. So yes, to your point, the human element and the people involved layered with the complex multi-jurisdictional compliance requirements is like, we call it it's a bit of a Rubik's Cube.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, there's just so much happening. And I think we put so much emphasis on manage your investments, know what your balance sheet looks like, how is your wealth growing, all of these things. But we don't talk about that kind of information that is so crucial.
I had a joke yesterday, was in New York, and said, we make compliance sexy again.
I like that.
They're like, what do you do? What's Orca do?
Justin Timberlake of compliance.
Yeah, we're bringing sexy back to compliance.
I like that. I love that. Orca is the Justin Timberlake of compliance.
There you go.
I love that. Absolutely. So, going kind of back to the team internally in family offices that are responsible for managing all of this, many times for the family. Sometimes it's family members. Sometimes they're not. They're just people that are brought on. They're managing a lot, right? You mentioned their external advisors. I think in your paper it says that most family offices have an average of 27 external advisors that they're working with at any point in time. Then you have everything they're managing within the family office, and most of these family offices run pretty lean. So their CFO might not just be managing one thing; they're managing all of the financials for the family and maybe multiple family members. So all of this can be quite, I would imagine, overwhelming when now you throw in, and now we need you to learn how to use all this technology, and there's 7 different technologies you have to learn. So what's the secret to not overtaxing this internal team with all this new learning they have to do and really achieving that operational efficiency?
Yeah. We like to call it the center of the bow tie concept. So if you picture a bow tie, there's a center and sort of 2 ends. On one side of the bow tie are actually the family members, people involved in the family office. On the other side of that is the technology. And the ability for those to talk to each other and the flow of information between both sides of the bow tie is really critical. This is where people and technology come together. The nirvana is the ability to have not only correct, relevant, important data, but also being able to manage the flow of the information from one end of the bow tie to the other. So, one of the greatest challenges, as we know, in family offices, people are strapped, right? You're doing probably 5 jobs.
Yep.
Family offices are super lean. And so it's this, a little bit of a love-hate about technology, while there's an awareness of these family office executives and principals that technology can ultimately make your family office more efficient. There's the challenge of onboarding and the near-term pain for the long-term gain.
Right.
That's a challenge. That being said, what's happening, it's not a trend. It's a reality where family offices are really evaluating their tech stack. So the important thing with technology is, taking a hard look at your tech stack if you have a tech stack. So what we see are kind of hybrids, right? Some family offices may just have an accounting system and maybe a reporting system, or some family offices have all of the systems, but they don't work together. And so there's a lot of evaluation of not just individual technologies, but how they work in concert with one another. That's really important. I think the other thing that I've seen a lot of as well, to the point of outsourcing services, there's a burgeoning industry of providers who help not just strategically in terms of evaluating this tech stack, what pieces make sense for your family office, right, to the point of the bespoke suit, but as well as a whole sort of industry of implementation, getting that tech implemented in the family office so it does not weigh on the shoulders of the actual team and the principals.
Yeah. Oh, that's great, because I can only imagine if
totally,
not learning
it's a
new
huge
software.
lift. But technology is there for, I think, ultimately, family office, especially the executives within a family office, technology is going to make things so much more efficient for them administratively, and it's going to free them up to do sort of higher and best use tasks. And I think what we're seeing the long-term effects of that, of being stretched, and in the future with technology being able to really focus on the things that, I think it's going to make people's jobs more fun and more interesting. And I think from a morale standpoint, great, rather than being bogged down by things that are just, an administrative burden and inefficient.
Efficiency, it protects the family over time from lots of different risks, just having, and we have all this technology at our fingertips.
Yeah.
Working off of a spreadsheet doesn't have to be the norm anymore, right? We understand why people do it, but they have access to a lot of great technology. It's finding the right one.
Oh, I know another thing. So with Orca, and I think really, really sort of characteristic of family offices is there is a very tight core of, central, folks that are in the family office, 2 or 3 people who have been with the principals a long time, that, it's really important for family offices to be private. But what we're also seeing is that with technology, you can still keep that core of, your CFO, your COO, your general counsel, whatever that, the bookkeeper, the accountant, that can all be still a tight number of people. And that's where the tech comes in to help make things even more efficient as that gets transitioned.
They can still run lean.
Yeah,
they
can
still
run
transition, to the new generations, the new people they bring in. So that kind of takes us to kind of the last thing we wanted to touch on today. And Kris and I talk a lot about this because we're seeing it with our clients where, we're in the midst of this really large wealth transfer, the biggest in history. I think it's about 70 trillion, that's expected to shift over the next 25 years. The next generation is starting to take these leadership roles. They have different values, different investment philosophies, than their parents and their grandparents, just different styles, different priorities in life. So how do you think it's kind of a big question and it's difficult to answer in just a couple sentences, but how do you think this significant generational shift is going to impact the future of family offices?
What's been really, really cool when I sit with a family where you're seeing this succession and generational planning happening, before our eyes. First of all, to see the relationship, where it gets very complicated for families and family offices is families have, parents, mom and dad, and kids. At the same time, there's really a need to have that hard conversation from a professionalized standpoint. Mm-hmm. What does this mean from estate planning, wealth management, et cetera, et cetera? So I'm seeing a lot of these hard conversations burgeoning. But as I might have mentioned earlier, it's really important to bring those conversations to the table, and technology often can be the catalyst of that, right?
It's so interesting that you said that. I meant to touch on that when you said it earlier. Having that conversation, regardless of your level of wealth with your parents about, okay, we're at this level now, right? You're getting older. I need to ensure that we can handle whatever it is that is coming our way. Yeah. And saying it as we are going to implement this technology that can just help us ensure we know what we own so that it's a clean transition and my brother and I don't get in a fight after you.
You totally. One of our this was also an inspiration of Orca, one of our founding families. Everyone wants equal access to information and knowledge. It's really hard to understand your place in a family if you don't have that and it's in your dad's head or your mom's head, mm-hmm. et cetera. Even across siblings, you see this. Some siblings in the business, some not, et cetera. But at your point, it's what is my role? What is my place in the family? How do I think about my future? And it goes even one generation further, how my kids impacted. So, we're looking.
Our kids think different than us.
Totally. And it's really fascinating because we're, G1, G2 is really interesting because that's where, you see the tension between, are the kids going to run this business? So there's sort of the family business side as well as the family office side to consider. Where it gets also interesting are the families with, you're in the G4, G5, and you're looking at 20, 40, 50 family members. And that's a whole different ball of wax.
Yeah, absolutely. This has been incredible. I don't know, Kris, if you have any kind of final comments before we move on, or we let Charmaine, we could be here all day, Charmaine, talking about this because technology is so interesting. But anything else, Kris, that you want to share?
No, I thought that was I think it's awesome. I love the the concept of trying to get families organized and using technology to do it. I mean, I think that Charmaine, you laid out like really well why it is important, and all the reasons that it's widely important. I mean, even for like in my practice, I always think about, oh my gosh, where is this? Okay, it's an estate tax, cool, now I know. And like this type of a software, this type of approach.
Kris, that's so good. You said that now it's shocking. Yeah. So, in the work that you, Celeste and Kris do, mm-hmm. not only having that information, but for the families to have the information to make intelligent decisions, right? Absolutely. If you don't have transparency of information, knowledge, how does an advisor, like Robin Glenn or anyone, provide the family with the holistic advice?
We were just talking to a gentleman today, Kris and I, where just understanding, having a better understanding of how his businesses are structured, we could do such a better job of giving him the right recommendations. Because at the end of the day, that's our job as advisors, is to do that, to take a look at it and ensure that we're putting them and their families in the best position possible. And so selfishly, I think all families that we work with should have Orca, right?
Yeah. No, and Celeste, I mean, to your point, this, humans are quite valuable, right? As I said in the beginning, the humans understand the family. That is the value. The technology is not going to do that for them, but the technology, it's humans and technology.
Yep.
So you as a talented advisor working with technology just makes you that much better in advising the family.
Yeah, I like that. We can be even much better. That's how
and the family can use that to make great decisions, educated decisions.
So important. Yeah, that's a great kind of note to end on. Families can use this to make good, important, educating decisions that are going to impact them for generations to come. So now that we've, kind of debunked the fact that robots are not going to take over, it's fine. We can work together with technology, at least for now. We'll see what happens, right? But clearly families are kind of at this pivotal point where it's time for them to take advantage of these technologies. And by bringing together the humans and this technology, they really can create that professional setting, that really operational efficiency that's going to help for so many generations to come. Thank you so much, Charmaine. This has been incredible. It's a good, deep insight into the world that we don't always see, which is the technology side of things. So we really appreciate that. And before we, wrap up for today, can you share how can our audience connect with you to delve deeper into Orca and all the tech solutions you provide?
Yeah, thank you for including us. We're thrilled. You can find Orca on LinkedIn. So, you can find us on LinkedIn. Orca has quite a nice presence, and we'd be very happy to have you all check out our website. It's www.withorca.com. But yeah, I encourage you to follow us on LinkedIn, see our posts. We really take a lot of care into sharing a lot of thought leadership and trends we're seeing also within our family offices, as well as a lot of sort of the quick pace of the technology out there in family office.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll make sure to include that information in our show notes. So thank you again. We really appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Kris. Thank you, Celeste.
Yes.
Thank
Kris,
you.
always a pleasure to be on here with you as well. So
Absolutely.
That's a wrap for today. We really appreciate you joining us as we talk about how humans and technology can work together, not against each other. Don't forget to check out our show notes where we'll have links to resources like Charmaine's very insightful white paper. Please make sure to like, subscribe, and if you've enjoyed what we've shared today, please share this podcast with others. So as always, thank you for joining us on another episode of Planning Reimagined, where your wealth journey meets our expert insights. We'll see you in the next episode. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and please be sure to follow on your favorite podcast player. To connect with us, you can email us at hello@robinglenn.com or schedule some time with us via the link in the show notes. You can also find us on Instagram and TikTok at Hello Robin Glenn.